Hello, welcome to You've Got This, a 4-week resilience building workshop. I'm Ethan Swift. I'm a doctoral intern, a full-time counselor in the UMBC Counseling Center. And Jen, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Jen Martinez, pronouns they, them. I am also a doctoral intern and a full-time counselor at the Counseling Center.
Awesome. So I want to start out with some intentions for this webinar. This is a series of 4, and this is one of 4. So it's for UMBC community members using evidence-based skills training, which focuses on building resilience. This is based on Marsha Linehan's mindfulness and dialectical behavior therapy. We do recommend a practice of mindfulness exercise before watching this webinar. This is just one example. However, we'll likely be doing one ourselves. For synchronous webinars, please check out the My UMBC group page. You can also access us through counseling.umbc.edu. And just a note, this is not a substitute for psychotherapy. If you would like some psychotherapy or interested in other clinical services, please contact the UMBC Counseling Center. There's our phone number. And again, this is one of 4. Mindfulness and stress management is the topic for this one. And this is one of 4 webinars, and it's topic number 1. So, Jen, I'll pass it over to you with this one.
Yeah, so today's webinar is going to be focused on mindfulness and what that means. I think people have probably heard that term thrown around and not completely sure what um, that entails. So we'll start in a moment with mindfulness of breath practice before jumping into some of the different skills around stress management. And so if you're willing to engage with this, I would ask you to sit up or lay down, whichever you prefer. Uh, both feet planted on the ground and just like imagining that you're being pulled up by a string. Okay. So start by finding a comfortable position. And again, if you're sitting in a chair, allow your feet to be flat on the floor with your legs uncrossed and your spine straight so that your posture supports your intention to be awake and aware. In this way, the posture is dignified but comfortable, not stiff or tensed up. If you are lying down, allow your legs to be uncrossed with your feet falling away from each other and your arms lying alongside and slightly away from your body. Now allow your eyes to close or lower them if that feels comfortable. Awareness to the sensations where the body is in contact with whatever you're sitting or lying on. Spend a few moments exploring these sensations. At a certain point, gather your attention and move it to focus on your feet so that the spotlight of attention takes in the toes, the soles of the feet, the heels, top of the feet, the ankles. Attend to any and all the physical sensations you can be aware of. Feet, ankles. Notice how sensations arise and dissolve in awareness. If there are no sensations, simply register a blank. This is perfectly fine. We're not trying to make sensation happen. We're simply registering what is already here. Now Expand your attention to take in the lower legs, the knees, then the rest of your legs. Hold both legs center stage in awareness. Notice whatever physical sensations there may be here in the legs. Expand your attention up the body, to the pelvis and hips, the lower back, abdomen. Move up the torso to include the chest and the back, right up to the shoulders, noticing all the physical sensations in the torso. Expand your attention again to include the left arm, then the right arm, then the neck and the face, head, until you're holding in awareness. See if it's possible to allow the whole body and its sensations to be just as they are. There's no need to try to control anything. As best as you can, allow sensations to be just as you find them. At a certain point, bring your awareness to the center of the body, to the sensations in the abdomen as the breath moves in and out of the body. Become fully aware of the changing patterns, physical sensations in this region of the body. If you like, you can place your hand here for a few breaths. Feel the abdomen rising and falling. There may be mild sensations of stretching as the abdomen gently rises with each in-breath. And there may be different sensations as the abdomen falls with each out-breath. For the full duration of each in-breath, the full duration of each out-breath, be alive to the sensations of breathing. There's no need to try to control the breath in any way at all. Simply let the breath breathe itself. Focus on the physical sensations, breath by breath. Sooner or later, you'll probably find that the mind wanders away to thinking, planning, remembering, or daydreaming. This happens and you notice that your attention is no longer on the breath. There's no need to judge yourself or criticize yourself in any way, and no need to rush back to the breath. Instead, taking your time, allow yourself to register where the mind had wandered to. Very gently but firmly, bring your attention back to the breath. Such mind wander will happen over and over again. Each time, remember that the aim is to simply notice what mind has been, and then to gently escort your attention back to the breath, seeing the mind wandering as a chance to cultivate patience and compassion as you bring the attention back. Remind yourself that noticing that the mind has gone and bringing it back again and again and again is the medication. This is the practice. continue to practice this by yourself. Back to the breath, allowing the breath to be like an anchor, grounding you in the present moment. When you're ready, gently bring attention back to your body, to your shoulders, back, down to your legs, and to your feet planted on the ground. So we wanted to start off by doing this practice because I think this is something that can help you practice on your own, coming back to your breath whenever your mind's wandering, just helping ground you in the present moment. Remembering that this is always available to you, especially if you find your mind scattered and dispersed by the rush and busyness of the day. That breath is always there as an anchor deep within you that you can use. So this is something we suggest that you practice at least twice a day for the first week of the mindfulness program as you're trying to build up this skill. We'll talk more about the different ways that you can utilize this and other strategies for coping. I think one thing I also just want to point out before moving on, that for some that the mindfulness of breath exercise might be something that they might not find helpful, and that's okay. And um, you know, kind of to reiterate, we'll be sharing a number of different strategies that you could use that may be helpful. We're trying to kind of give you a whole range to kind of have different tools to put in your toolbox. Um, and there are also a number of different guided mindfulness exercises that aren't necessarily the mindfulness of breath. Um, so if you also were interested in alternative practices, we have some resources at the end of this presentation.
Thanks, Jen. I appreciate you leading that. So I want us to take a moment as we're watching this to reflect on what brought you into this webinar that you would like to improve. And what do you like when you're your most relaxed self? Some examples being able to smile or laugh easily, feeling positive emotions, being worry-free, more caring, more generous, helping others, becoming more chatty, a relaxed body with no tension, breathing slowly or becoming sleepy. So those are just some examples. I know for me, I feel positive emotions, smile easily, very helpful. So just want to give us that moment to think about that.
Yeah, and so, kind of in thinking about what is, what it's like when we're most relaxed self, I think that makes it then easy to think about when are we not that? So when are we stressed? Right. So part of this is to develop that awareness of similar to the exercise that we did about what's happening within your body and your own internal um, like different sensations. That part of this is trying to develop an awareness of what's happening so that you can um, kind of take the steps needed to um, address that. So when you're not your most relaxed self, often that's due to any number of stress, right? And I think you know your interest in coming to um, a webinar focused on coping with stress probably means that you're experiencing some amount of stress. And so we just want to take a moment to identify all the different sources. I think this might even create even more stress, reminding you of all the different ways or different things that can contribute. But I think we really do want to emphasize that there are a number of different ways that we might experience stress or what may cause stress for us. So it could be something in the environment, um, whether it's within our own um, home, in the community. It could be events happening nationally. We have this, we're currently in the midst of a pandemic, and that there are also larger systemic experiences that can contribute to stress, such as discrimination and um, different types of marginalization. We might also be experiencing interpersonal stress. So this is stress from different relationships in our life. We may be home with people more often that we're not used to spending so much time with. So there may also be more conflicts. Um, or people may be getting on each other's nerves. Or maybe we're feeling kind of isolated from folks or disconnected. And then we may also be experiencing stress within ourselves, whether that's kind of the different criticisms we may have about ourselves and how we're doing, the expectations we set for ourselves, um, kind of any sort of um, kind of difficulty or criticism around not being able to say no to things, feeling overcommitted, not being able to create the boundaries that we need, or maybe feeling guilt or shame about something that we've done or thought or wished we'd done. And so there are a number of different reasons why people may be stressed. And I think that's important to recognize of what are the things that are contributing to a lot of our stress. And are those things that we can change or adapt in any ways to help mitigate that? And so along with identifying what may be causing us stress, we also want to be thinking about when do we know when we're experiencing too much stress. Um, and I think, one of the pieces that may have come up while doing the mindfulness of breath exercise is you may have been noticing physical sensations that you weren't aware of. Maybe um, you noticed that you were tired, more tired than you thought, or maybe you noticed you're hungry, or that um, maybe you noticed tension in your shoulders that you didn't realize that you were holding. You may also have experienced or noticed some emotions that you may not have been aware of, whether it's feeling kind of emotionally um, kind of nervous or angry, worrying about other things, feeling down, feeling sad. Um, or you may be maybe feeling light, um, but if you're feeling, but kind of if you are experiencing too much stress, usually it's a lot of these negative, or kind of the, yeah, negative types of feelings, right? And I think um, part of recognizing how we're feeling can help us figure out, are we stressed, and is this too much stress? Um, and then I think in the middle, the behavioral component of when we're feeling too stressed, we might notice this because we're maybe being impatient or being snappy. Um, we're probably going to be less likely to ask for help. Um, we might turn to other behaviors that may relieve our stress in the short term, like smoking, other substance use, drinking, um, and then also a loss of sexual interest. So, there's ways that we can try to think about, what how do we know when we're stressed? When is this kind of too much and it's becoming a problem? And then once we develop that awareness, then we can start taking actions to um, address that.
I want to take another pause and ask ourselves, how do you know when you're stressed? Think about checking symptoms that you experience. So whether that's kind of in your mind or writing it down, thinking about what Jen said regarding physical, behavior, and emotional. Um, Try to find which ones of symptoms of too much stress that you fit into each of those categories. I know for me, I get back pain. I feel like maybe impatient in the behavioral. Um, I get nervous in the emotional. So I know I relate to some of these. So definitely take a moment and take a look, see if you relate to any of them. I also want to bring in what's called the Yerkes-Dodson law. In summary, it tells us that we have an optimal arousal and optimal performance when it comes to our uh, arousal and our anxiety level, essentially. So, the higher the arousal or anxiety, the decrease in performance. However, on the other hand, if we don't have enough anxiety on the left, we're less likely to perform at our optimal arousal or optimal performance. As we kind of find that sweet spot, which we need a little bit of anxiety, we need a little bit of arousal to increase our performance. There is a middle ground that the Yerkes-Dodson law says you'll reach your optimal performance. Um, Jen, am I missing anything on that? You want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of this is, oftentimes when folks talk about maybe anxiety around exams or a project that um, that there's a piece of some of the anxiety or feeling anxious about the um, the test or about the project help create motivation. Um, and I think that, part of this is to validate that that's true, that, you know, that some level of anxiety gives us a little bit of that motivation to do that work. Um, and and that there's a limit to that, right? So as Ethan was mentioning, that once we get past that optimal level of anxiety or arousal, that then it becomes debilitating. And so it makes it harder to engage in studying, right? If we're so anxious that we're no longer able to like concentrate and um, remember what we're studying, right? That then um, it no longer becomes helpful. And so a piece of this and a piece of all of the mindfulness practices is really to identify, where are you on this curve, right? Because um, if you notice that you're more on the high end of this curve, that that might mean it's time to engage in some skills to bring down that anxiety so that you can more effectively engage in the work that you want to be doing. And I think another piece I also want to point out is that it also is suggesting that anxiety on its own is not bad, or any sort of emotion that we experience is not in and of itself a negative thing, right? That there is a use to that. And I think we often want to not feel anxious, but I think there is a way that it helps us. And if we can be kind to ourselves when we experience anxiety, that we recognize that it's our body trying to help us do the things we want to do. That's all. Yeah, and so kind of on that same note, that we want to then talk about what are those specific things to bring our anxiety or our arousal down just a little bit, enough to get to, as Ethan put it, that sweet spot, right? So, um, you know, a few strategies that you can engage in is problem solving. So is there something that's causing too much stress in your life, right? So thinking back to all of the different sources of stress, identifying what are the things that are in your control, what are the things not in your control, right? And so it might, you might not be able to get all of the sounds in the neighborhood to stop and have like no sirens going off. But you can maybe find a room that isn't close to a window, or is more um, kind of more centered inside of your house, where that those noises will be less likely to bother you. Or is there somewhere you can go that, I know that people are pretty limited in where they can go right now, but thinking about whether that's somewhere in your house, whether that's a park down the street, or something that helps um, uh, relieve some of the sources of stress in your life, and thinking about what those could be. Another thing could be seeking social support, right? I think this is something many of us already do, and I think part of it is being really intentional about that. That when we are feeling stressed, that sometimes it means we may be even more caught up in our own emotions, and maybe even self-criticisms, that we're not asking for other people to help us, and whether that's to let us vent, whether that's to help us with the tasks that we're doing, um, right? That part of it is using the resources around you to reduce the stress level, so that to the point where you can engage in the work you want to be doing. Um, and then there's also, um, the control and avoidance strategies that may be a way to um, that you may engage in to try to not feel what's happening, right? That when we're experiencing distress, that we want to not feel that, and that's completely human. To not want to feel negative things. And I think, one thing to be keeping in mind is that I think a lot of times this avoidance and trying to control how we're feeling um, might be helpful in the short term, but it isn't an effective strategy long term. Right? You might want to avoid studying for that exam, and taking a break for 5 to 10 minutes may um, help you be able to re-engage in the work again. But if you never come back to studying, right, then you're not going to be able to do well on that exam. Um, and so, right, so part of this is thinking about um, how to flexibly use this. And so mindfulness may be a really helpful strategy in to use in conjunction with a number of these things, and also um, kind of as its own skill to recognize, um, practice being in the moment, um, being able to attend to how you're feeling, and then from there to identify what are the strategies um, that might be the most helpful for managing that. And so I've been talking a lot about mindfulness, and you're probably wondering, well, I keep hearing this. What does this actually mean? And and there are kind of three main components of mindfulness. That um, there's the piece of developing that awareness, right? So we spent a lot of time um, during the mindfulness of breath exercise, trying to identify what are we feeling in the moment. um, what thoughts might be coming up, or what may we be distracted by, um, how might we be feeling just emotionally, and what actions we might be engaging in, right? So oftentimes we might not be aware of what we're doing. um, I think oftentimes when I think about this, the different ways I might be on autopilot, right? That there's sometimes maybe I'm eating a food that I really enjoy and I don't realize I've already eaten the entire bag, right? I didn't have that awareness that I was like just continuing to eat that. And part of, like, if we were to extend mindfulness to eating, right, that would mean that I was attending to every um like chip I ate and being aware of what I was consuming and not kind of doing it um just so automatically and without that awareness, right? And that's the same with any behaviors we do, that we might automatically react to stress um, in a way that we're not aware of. It's just our habit. And then mindfulness also encompasses this present centeredness. So being really in the moment, in the here and now. And so I think, oftentimes if we're when we're feeling any negative emotions, we're not in the present moment. We might be thinking about the past and feeling maybe sad, regretful, um, maybe mourning something we don't have now, right? And if we're feeling anxious, it's often thinking about something in the future, right? What might happen or what might not happen. Um, and so part of the practice is, can we be present in this moment? Um, you may still be feeling anxious and you may be still be feeling down, but can you be in this moment trying to engage in what's important to you right now, right? And so kind of thinking about the like example for studying for an exam, right? That you might be worrying, as you're studying, you're worrying, will this be on the exam? Will I know this enough to be able to write a short answer on it? And so we're worrying a lot about the future. But if we're able to practice just being in the moment and reading and trying to fully understand the material, um, that may be helpful for us in the long term. And then the third component of mindfulness is the acceptance piece. So, not judging or criticizing ourselves for the way we're feeling in a moment. Um, as I mentioned, that we may feel critical of ourselves for being anxious about something. Maybe thinking, oh, this is not such a big deal. Why can't I get over it? And I think oftentimes we'll talk about this in other webinars, but that oftentimes that emotion that we're feeling is information that our body's trying to communicate to us. And so part of the acceptance is recognizing this is happening for a reason. Um, what is my body trying to tell me? And can I be kind to myself for feeling this the way that I'm feeling at this moment? I don't know if Ethan, you have anything to add to that.
I appreciate that. That was really thorough.
So I want to take a moment for you to just reflect about what might be on your mind. Um, so, again, as we were talking a little bit about, oftentimes if we're thinking about the past, there often are thoughts or emotions like regret, remorse, feeling discouraged, feeling sad, thinking about the future, a lot of anxiety and worries and fears, maybe feeling overwhelmed and intimidated by all of that. And that part of what's happening in the moment, or that mindfulness and acceptance can help us be more in the present, right? And really feel grounded in what's happening here and now. Um, and I think another piece to add to this is that there's a point here about what fires together wires together. And so usually that, when we're feeling um, something really intensely, that activates parts of our brain that are related to um, that emotion, right? So if we're feeling really angry, and even as we're feeling that emotion or having those thoughts of being upset, excuse me, um, that those the anger may then make us feel, all of the sensations that we feel in our body that make us angry, right? And so, the more that we think or feel something, then the easier it is for us to think or feel that way. And I think this is part of what's happened, or what we're wanting to address, is that that there are thoughts that happen, or thoughts that we might have when we're feeling a certain way, right? And the more that we have that thought, the more we're going to feel that way. And so part of it is, can we loosen that association? Can we change what the thought might be in that moment, um, to try to find a thought that's more congruent with how we want to be feeling, whether that's less stress, less worried, um, less sad or discouraged.
So I do want to discuss some coping strategies in dealing with stress. Um, it kind of goes through this diagram here, starting with self-compassion. So being realistic about your responsibility. With that said, not taking on too much, and being compassionate when you do have too much, like knowing that this is unrealistic, or knowing that this is too much and it's okay to feel like it's too much. Lowering your expectation in that sense, like that kind of prohibits you from taking on too much. Like, for example, if you're studying for an exam and then you sign up to help a friend move, and then you ask to be part of a committee, maybe lowering some of that expectation, and knowing that like you can't always do everything, and always balance work and play. Um, that's really compassionate to yourself when you can both engage in something that's fun and engage in something that's productive, knowing there's a balance there. And always, like, I think with our physical needs, like, obviously eating and sleeping might seem on the surface like we all do that, we all need to do that. But seriously, like, finding a sleep regimen that makes sense for your life and what makes sense for the amount of sleep that you need. Engaging in proper eating in terms of nutrition, you'd be surprised how much nutrition really impacts our stress, and our stress impacts our nutrition. So how we want to eat and how much we eat, how little we eat. So maintaining a proper regimen will actually greatly decrease the stress, as well as exercising. I think, again, we're always told to exercise, but we don't always think about the impact that exercise can have on our mental health. It can really increase our mood, it can increase our or decrease our stress, help us sleep better, and then in turn help us eat better too. Um, Moving to accept. So focusing on the present, we talk about mindfulness a lot in this webinar. So thinking about those strategies that we're learning. No worry. I think like obviously that's easier said than done, but the no worries mindset that perhaps we could decrease the amount of worry we have and increase the amount of joy that we have, whether that's through joyous activities, whether that's through mindfulness, staying focused on the present moment. I've even as a mental health provider, I don't always think about how beneficial it is to just focus on the present. Because if we think in the past or the future, we often have emotions that are difficult to sit with. Um, so maintaining that mindfulness is really helpful. And then moving into positive, which I kind of was alluding to, a fun activity, creativity, enjoying in what you're doing, spending time with good people. The more you fill your life with positive activities, positive people, enjoyment, the more likely you're going to have positive thoughts. And then, like, let's say you are thinking about the past, you'll think about the past with joy because you'll have more joy in your life. It also influences the way we think and influences our mood when we do positive, fun activities. So I definitely want to emphasize these coping strategies. And then a reflection. So we're going to be talking about sleep hygiene in a little bit. And let's ask ourselves, when do you go to bed at night? And then it kind of has a range here. And we'll get into sleep hygiene, but I do want to let us register, when am I going to bed at night?
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. And part of that reflection is to really not only see, what time you go to bed, but how much sleep are you actually getting throughout the night, right? And so part of it is like assuming that everyone has some sort of morning commitments, or early day commitments. If you're going to bed really late, or I guess like in the AM, then that means you might be getting deprived of sleep. And I think this is really important to be thinking about ways that this can impact our stress level and our body generally in ways that we're not aware of. So um, some of the ones we want to highlight is that it does create mood changes, right? So if you're tired, most likely you're going to be a lot more cranky, right? You might be, excuse me, like snapping at folks, or um, kind of feeling a bit groggy. You might have some memory issues. Like it's harder to, because our brain is not fully rested. It can't really take in information and process it into our long-term memory, if it had more rest. It's part of the reason why pulling all-nighters are not actually that effective if you're trying to study and remember information. It affects our immune system and our physical body in all of these different ways. We're seeing this risk for diabetes, weight gain, high blood pressure, risk of heart disease. That that when our body's not getting enough rest to repair itself and to take care of itself, we then expose ourselves to a lot more physical ailments, and also have a lot of psychological um, difficulties as a result. So we just want to point towards a few things that are really helpful to engage in um, to help with some of the sleep hygiene. So really trying to engage in um, and be really intentional about um, kind of taking care of ourselves to be able to be much more um, better able to regulate how we're feeling and to and be more present minded, right? That it's harder to do that when we have difficulty concentrating already or are feeling sleep deprived. So one thing is to create a regular sleep schedule for yourself. I know that sounds so simple and it's a lot harder. Um, it's a lot easier said than done. And I think that there is a way that we often take for granted how much, if we're changing when we fall asleep at night, that impacts our entire our body, right? In the same ways that when we're jet lagged, we can feel the ways our body doesn't feel good. And if we're going to bed like at 11 o'clock one day and then go to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning another day, we've essentially given ourselves 3 hours of jet lag, right? And so I think that's helpful. I find that to be helpful in remembering how important it is and how much my body feels when my own kind of sleep schedule is thrown off. So again, really trying to emphasize to try to keep it as regular as possible, and to create and foster an environment that really helps um, falling asleep um, a little bit easier. So one might be trying to minimize screen time. They say, to stop screen time 30 minutes to an hour before bed, because that light and even the things that we might be doing on our phones might be kind of stimulating our brain in ways that make it harder then to fall asleep. Trying to reduce the amount of light coming in, again, trying to do what we can to try to minimize the noise, and recognizing that there are a lot of things that we can't control or we may not be able to control. Are there things that we can problem solve to minimize that interference with our sleep? And then the sleep inducing body condition says that might sound really weird and jargony, but what this means is kind of making sure that we are, again, not kind of physically activated. So this is the reason why folks say not to exercise within a couple of hours before bed, because our body is then really kind of energized. And then it makes it even harder then to just shut our body down and go to bed. And relatedly, to reduce the sleep interfering substances. So, drinking coffee at night, um, drinking alcohol, these are all things that make sleep, that could interfere with sleep. And so be really mindful of when you're consuming that and trying not to do that within close to bedtime or at a time that may be interfering with your sleep. You may also want to write a worry diary. So I think sometimes when um, we're trying to fall asleep, one of the barriers is the worrying that happens in our mind. And so sometimes it could be helpful to just write down what is happening or what is coming into our mind, so that, particularly if you're worried that there's something you have to do and you're not going to remember it in the morning, you have that record there. Um, and that you can just also try to put those worries somewhere that you can come back to at another time, but kind of getting it all out and trying to then focus on the here and now, trying to sleep, right? Instead of thinking ahead to all the things that need to be done or that you should do. And also meditation. Not 100% sure what the 9-0 is. I don't know if you know what that is, Ethan. Um, but it's I think just really engaging in some sort of meditation is helpful for folks. Again, really trying to focus on what's happening in the moment, and if there are any racing thoughts or worrying, to do some of these mindfulness activities and meditation activities to kind of bring yourself into the present moment, because then it will make it easier then to fall asleep.
Thanks, Jen. I also want to jump in with a couple time management skills and kind of tips. This is the Eisenhower matrix. So if you think about what's urgent, important, not important, you make that a matrix. So if it's urgent and important, do it today. If it's not urgent and not important, maybe you don't even have to do it at all. If it's not urgent and important, maybe schedule a time. Urgent but not important, delegate it to someone else. So you could think about this in the sense of like, I think when I have a bunch of tasks that I have to do, my go-to is like, what do I want to do? And that's not always the best time management skill, because sometimes you end up kind of putting off what's important and urgent. So if you think about it in this, and you can even draw it out and put your tasks into this matrix, and it might help you kind of decide how to move forward with that. So I definitely highly recommend that. And I also want to do a reflection. So we went over a lot of things today. And among the different types of coping strategies, which ones would you like to work on? And here are some examples. Of course, we want to work on all of them, but we can't always work on every single one. You have one especially pressing or more important to you, or just one that you feel like you need extra help with. Try to think about which ones you want to work on and reflect on that.
And as we start wrapping up, I also want to highlight the different ways that we might be able to practice mindfulness. So, we started with a really formal guided mindfulness exercise, the mindfulness of breath, but there are a number of different more formal strategies or practices, that there's some with diaphragmatic breathing. Um, there's some guided imagery types of exercises, like watching, leaves on a stream or taking a walk through a forest. Really just trying to center yourself in the experience of that exercise, so that you can practice then being in the moment. And then there are also ways you can do this informally. So one is mindful walking. Um, you can take walks and be aware of the sensations of all of your different senses as you're walking, and just being really attuned to them. There are also a lot of cities have labyrinths, which are just like really intricate like pathways, and part of the exercise is just being in the moment, following that path, um, and trusting that you'll get to the end of that path. Um, and so not worrying about where are you going, are you going to get there, when are you going to get there, but really being very mindful of your walking. You can do this with chores or daily tasks like brushing your teeth. So being really mindful of those sensations, maybe the water, and um, maybe the taste of the toothpaste, engaging all of your senses to be in that moment, or washing dishes, feeling the the water, the feeling of the soap suds and the smells, hopefully the smells of soap and not kind of gross stuff. But I think all of this is just to say that there are all these ways to engage in being in the present moment. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It doesn't have to be, um, you don't have to pay for anything. That this is something you can engage in and bring your attention to these things in the moment.
Absolutely. So I do want to wrap up with some resources. Although these are links that you cannot click because it's a video, we will be able to post them for you. I do recommend WellTrack, which, although that's a link, we could download that on our phones. UMBC students have access to that, free access and more detailed and more access, essentially, as well as some apps that are free as well as paid apps, mostly free, and then some of the updates or upgrades are paid. But I definitely recommend all of these: Headspace, Let's Meditate, Sleep and Guided Meditation, Breathe to Relax, Calm, Simply Yoga. I also have some resources such as the Counseling Center. That is our during office hours line, our after hours support line. You can find us at counseling.umbc.edu, and you can find our links to my UMBC and WellTrack on there as well. Here are some crisis contacts as well as some information regarding specific identity crisis, if you fall into any of those categories. Also would like to share some coronavirus specific information, resources for essential needs, anti-racism resources, coping with racism, and some justice and bystander training. I want to give some credit. So Dr. Soon-Hee Lee at UMBC adapted this content and put the slides together, with the credit to the rest of the folks on the slides. Again, research is based on Linehan's, Dr. Lee and Mason published research based on the workshop, and it's based on Linehan's DBT. And if you have any questions or requests of the slides, please contact Dr. Soon-Hee Lee at soonhee@umbc.edu. And we just want to thank you for your time and energy in this webinar. Just watching it is really great, and we appreciate y'all. So Jen, if you have any closing remarks, that's great. Not, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.